Are the walls crumbling at the House of Mouse over woke politics? Disney's new SEC report seems to indicate that may be the case. The company acknowledged that it was facing a, quote, misalignment with the general public over its ESG policies and that consumer perception of the company based on their political statements presented risk to our reputation and brands. Disney's reckoning with so-called woke messaging comes as other brands, including Bud Light, Target, are facing financial consequences from their policies, with conservative groups claiming credit. Here to discuss whether ESG or woke messaging is responsible for these financial hits is Will Hild, Executive Director at Consumers Research. Will, thank you for joining us. So talk to us about Disney first. There's a perception that things are really a mess there. Do you actually put it on the actions of conservatives, expressing their frustration with perceived wokeness at the company?
I think what conservative groups like ours have done is really just help give a voice to the frustration of millions of consumers that are dissatisfied with the products that Disney is putting out. I think what's been incredible about this pushback on Disney, on companies like Anheuser-Busch and Target, has been, not that there's been a single leader calling for a boycott or calling for changing purchasing decisions, but that consumers have just had it with, basically being insulted by the very companies that are supposed to be serving. I think Disney is exhibit number one in cases of this type of behavior.
So talk to me about ESG. Explain what that is. And, is this just a case of companies are adopting policies? If consumers don't like them, they don't have to engage or use the brand and, let the market decide?
Well, ESG is billed by its supporters as a style of investing, but it really is a stalking horse for large asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to push far left woke politics on corporate America using public pension dollars. BlackRock being one of the largest investors of public pensions, state, local, even federal. And they basically use money that's supposed to be handled in a politically neutral, completely focused on returns. They've now used ESG as basically an excuse to push their own personal politics. But what's so interesting about this latest disclosure that Disney just did, where they said, basically they highlighted for investors that they're having some issues with disconnecting with consumers over their far left woke politics, is that shows just how much of a lie this entire ESG movement has been, because the entire excuse for asset managers doing this was saying, listen, we're not actually playing politics with your money. All of these things are in the long-term financial interests of these companies. These are all the directions in which the market is going. We're just helping push these companies to get there sooner. Well, Disney is proof positive that that is not the case. Look at this company. It's gone woke. Its movies are woke. All its advertising has gone woke. And it's crashing and burning. So it really puts a lie to the entire ESG scam.
Are shareholders upset about these policies, given that if they're harmful for the health, for the business climate of the company, you'd think they're losing money, they ought to be speaking up?
Yeah, well, you're seeing a lot of large asset holders. I think the state of Florida is actually in the state of suing Disney over their misuse of corporate assets to push far left woke politics instead of serving their consumers the way they're supposed to. So absolutely, shareholders are pushing back. And some of the largest shareholders of these big public corporations are now, because of the large size of the funds, public pensions themselves. And so you're starting to see, government entities push back on this as well, because they see how it's hurting returns. Disney's stock has basically been trading flat for the last 5-6 years. They're down a little bit over 5 years, over a period in which the market has risen precipitously. So it's absolutely hurting the returns for shareholders, and increasingly shareholders are dumping the stock because of it.
I've heard some commentators express the idea that we have now surpassed peak wokeness and we're kind of going down the other side. Obviously, wokeness is a broad descriptor. We've had guests on the show struggle to define exactly what it is. I think of it as these kind of very socially, culturally progressive norms around speech and identity and behavior being enshrined and forced on others. And if you don't abide by them, you're canceled or you're unpersoned, or you could be fired, or you could lose your opportunity. Obviously, this is a very broad descriptor of what's going on. I've seen, we've seen some, maybe it's anecdotal, it's hard to tell what the numbers for any of this actually is, but companies resisting calls for Netflix, that was a while ago, maybe a year ago, telling people who work there, look, sorry, if you don't like the kind of comedy that Dave Chappelle represents, this isn't a good place for you to work. We're going to feature, controversial, provocative content. There were a couple examples of things like that, suggesting to me at least that perhaps companies are now realizing that following their most progressive employees down this rabbit hole is not actually good for the business. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think we may have seen peak wokeness. I'd say we're still in the early innings of this fight, probably the second or the third inning. But the momentum has certainly shifted towards focusing more on consumers and not wasting time and energy, basically just ticking them off. But there are some, notable pushback. Target's CEO just came out a couple weeks ago and basically lied about a lot of what went into their controversy earlier this year around targeting kids with LGBTQ-themed products and tuck underwear for bathing suits for children. So there is going to be a give and take, I think, over the next few years. A big battle is basically underway. But the momentum, 3-4 years ago, there was basically no one pushing back. Every corporation seemed to be, falling all over itself to adopt whatever the newest woke trend was. And that's no longer the case. I think companies are more reticent to do so. I think when you'll really see this trend end is when these companies start to dump some of these, DEI style, either the department or the employees themselves. I mean, case after case, what we see is it's often a minority of employees within the companies who are pushing them to go in a far left direction. We saw that with Anheuser-Busch, with the marketing director who basically hated, had said basically on video that she thought very little of the existing drinkers of Bud Light. And I think these companies are learning the hard way that when you employ people like that, and even more so when you listen to them, really all that you're going to get for it is punishment in the market.
Well, in the case of Target, are conservatives who are boycotting Target saying that they don't think the products you mentioned should be carried at all? Is there a difference between that and the Budweiser example, where it's frustration with a marketing campaign that seems very ill-tailored to the product, or has contempt for the people who are consumers of the product, versus a Target where it's like, well, if you don't agree, you don't like those products, you don't have to buy them. But do you think that the pushback is actually saying no, Target shouldn't offer those kinds of things?
Well, that's going to differ depending on the consumer. What I would say is you could go a step farther and say if you don't want those products offered, you don't have to go to Target, which is what consumers have been criticized by the CEO of Target for doing, is just simply taking their business elsewhere. And he accused them of creating an unsafe work environment for the first time in their company's history, which is rather laughable because they've just fresh off of having to close a number of their stores because of issues with violent crime in some of these inner city areas where they're having a real resurgence of that here in the last few years. So, yeah, I do think it differs depending on, which company you're talking about. I do think there was an issue even at Target with targeting kids. The displays that were of question were right next to or even incorporated with displays for products for children. So people felt like their kids were being targeted. And certainly with Disney, that's the case. That's mainly the products they make are targeting children, and the movies that they make, they've increasingly included woke nonsense is targeting children. So I do think that is part of what really ticks people off, is when they feel like that their own children are being targeted by these companies. But again, you have Anheuser-Busch where clearly the company just didn't think much of its own customers.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.